You might have seen headlines about a potential AI bubble.
Is there going to be an AI bubble burst?
Is the AI bubble about to pop?
We are absolutely in an AI bubble now.
They're all basically saying the same thing. If the bubble pops, it will look bad. The world will go into a recession, which means you could lose your job. I mean, we've seen this 25 years ago. It was called the internet bubble.
Many now starting to draw comparisons to the dot-com bubble.
Never before seen on the US market.
Okay, bubbles are bad, and we're not there yet. But today the odds are quite high, because everyone is excited by AI.
Fresh all-time highs in the session.
But people don't seem to know that the most fragile piece of the economy, one that can put the world in a bad place, is the microchip industry.
Semiconductors are the new oil.
Chips are the new oil.
We depend on them for almost everything we consume.
Today there's a race. Some people would call it a war. This started as a race between companies, but now this is a race between nations. Putin said 10 years ago that whoever leads in AI will rule the world. And this is true. The country that has the most computing power gets the most power. Period. But you know what? This is not the first time history has seen nations race for a big technology. During World War II, the race was about aluminum and steel. The more of these metals you have, the more airplanes and missiles you could make, which makes sense. And we all know how that ended. Then during the Cold War, the Americans and the Soviets raced for space. The race ended when Americans landed on the moon.
It's one small step for man.
This determined the world order, and the reason why Americans got ahead is the fact that NASA invested so much money in microchips. This is how the new race that would determine the new world order quickly became the chip race. But why is this important for us? Well, the outcome of this race has a direct impact in our lives, because chips are everywhere. In your phone, in your computer, but also in your car, TV, fridge, printer, headphone, charger, projector, basically anything that has any electronics in it.
Semiconductors are the brains, yes, are the brains for all devices, appliances, applications we have.
But most importantly, the chips are used in the military.
The US military says it wants to become an AI-first fighting force.
Whoever has the best chips has the most advanced technology.
Killer robots powered by artificial intelligence.
Most people think that because chips are everywhere and cheap, they're easy to make. But they're not. Making advanced chips at a large scale is extremely difficult. We are now at a choke point. These chips, the most advanced ones that we use in the latest smartphones and in AI, almost all of them are made by a single company, inside the most expensive factory in human history. This factory is located in a small island called Taiwan. If anything bad happens to this island, the global economy will be disrupted. So how did this island become so important? Who is winning the chip race, and what can we learn from this? To better understand the chip race, we first need to understand how this started. After World War II, this is how a computer looked like.
ENIAC was revolutionary in being the first large-scale general-purpose electronic digital computer ever built.
And its job was to figure out where the bombs would land.
Crowds before the White House await the announcement from the president that the Japs have surrendered unconditionally.
It had like 18,000 vacuum tubes, which sounds like a lot, but this is like the worst computer in history. This is how early computers made calculations. A tube turned on was coded as 1 and off as 0. Simple, right? But these computers had two issues. One, as you can see, they're taking so much space. This one is like a 3-bedroom apartment. And two, the bulbs were not reliable. They attract moth and they break. And when they do, engineers had to debug the computer every few hours. But 2 years later, semiconductors solved both issues. So what is a semiconductor? I'm glad you asked. You see, most materials either let electric current flow freely like copper wires or block the current like glass. But semiconductors are different. They can do both. The most common semiconductor is silicon, which is basically just sand. You can tweak it to make the electricity flow, and you can use it to build a transistor. A transistor is basically a switch. It can be either on or off, like the bulbs, but much smaller. Okay, so far it's a boring device, but when you stack those transistors, it becomes interesting. It becomes a calculator. It works like a human brain. We call it a chip. The smaller the transistors, the more you can fit into one chip. The more you fit, the more powerful the chip is. This is the first chip ever built. It has one transistor. It's basically useless. But we've come a long way since then. Today iPhone chips have billions of transistors. And before Apple even existed, a lot of the chip makers were born in California, in a valley that was quickly named after the material it's made of. This is the Silicon Valley. Since then, computing power doubled roughly every 2 years. This became a trend that is known as Moore's Law. This was the start of a never-ending race. At first, semiconductors were used for rockets, where the size and the weight of the computer is the most important thing. NASA invested a lot in chips, and Americans were ahead, as we saw earlier. Meanwhile, on the other side of the globe, Japan was completely destroyed. Japan was like, I have nothing to lose, I will bet in this new technology. This is the only way I can save the economy. But instead of focusing on space, they tried to make the smallest everyday electronics. This is the first pocket-sized calculator they made, and it was really good. I mean, even today's calculators are not that different from this one, right? But you know what? Americans didn't take Japan seriously. They joked that Japan was the country of click-click because Japanese engineers brought their fancy cameras to chip conferences, and they used them to take pictures and copy the American technology. That joke backfired at the Americans. Not only Japan succeeded at copying the chips, they were actually making higher quality at a cheaper price. They quickly surpassed the US, they dominated the markets for TVs,
It's a Sony.
cars,
Toyota Corolla, 1798.
and they launched
The incredible sounding Super Walkman.
Do you remember that thing? It feels like it was yesterday. Anyways, Japan grew very fast and they actually became the second largest economy in the world. The Americans were not happy, so they did what they do best. They slapped tariffs on Japanese electronics, and suddenly Japanese products were not cheap anymore. But it was too late. At that stage, Japanese companies were so ahead. But these were not the same chips the Americans had. There are different types of chips. One's tasked with processing or calculating, and others tasked with remembering. There are other types, but we'll focus on these for now. Japanese companies were ahead of the US on the memory chips, which we call today RAM. This is the temporary computer's memory. Like when you have multiple Google Chrome tabs open, the computer remembers them. But as soon as you turn it off, the memory is erased. Although the American company Intel invented the memory chip technology, they failed to compete with Japanese companies like Toshiba and Hitachi. Okay, that's memory. Then you have the microprocessors or CPUs, which is the brain of the computer. The US stayed ahead in processing chips. This is how the leadership table looked like in the 80s. But soon, a new player gets in the picture. A young, hungry company in South Korea saw this opening and sprinted through it. That company was Samsung. While the US and Japan were fighting each other with tariffs, South Korea was building the factories that would make them the new kings of chips. And one event helped them get there faster, because in the 90s the world suffered from a global recession.
The hustle and bustle of the 1980s has been replaced by a landscape of vacant buildings and vacant lots.
So both the US and Japan were cautious. They cut their spending to save money. But the Korean companies did the opposite. And at the same time, their currency was cheaper, which means they could build factories for a cheaper price than Americans and Japanese. In 1992, Samsung became the #1 memory chip producer in the world and held the top spot since then. Now we get to the part of the story that gets a little tricky, because this is where a turning point happened. Until 1987, tech companies like Intel and Texas Instruments made the chips from start to finish. But as the computing power got higher, the complexity followed. Making those chips became very costly and harder to improve. So for the first time, there was a need for the industry to split the roles. On one side, you have the chip designers like Qualcomm or Nvidia, who decided to focus on designing the chip and making sure it's optimized as much as possible. But they wouldn't make them. They let other specialized companies build them for them, usually at a lower price. Those players are called fabs. They don't design, they only mass produce chips for different companies. They put all of their efforts in developing better manufacturing processes. This is how they're able to produce for cheaper. The best way to understand the relationship between these companies is to think of construction. The chip designer is the architect, and the chip maker is the builder. A third party is involved in this, which is the tool maker, but I don't want to confuse you now. We'll get there in a second.
The beautiful island. This was the name given to Taiwan by the early Portuguese.
While change in the industry was happening, Taiwan was looking at this. They saw how their neighbors Japan and South Korea got so rich out of these technologies, and they saw how the US was struggling with the chip making. So they were like, why not try it for ourselves? So in the 90s, the Taiwanese government made a big bet. They asked this guy to build their chip fab industry. Maurice Chang had already spent 25 years at Texas Instruments, which was the largest company at the time. He was the GOAT of the semiconductors industry, so he was like,
challenge accepted.
This is how the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company was created, which is more known as
TSMC. It's one of the largest semiconductor manufacturers in the world.
This was a costly and risky business, but the government still funded almost half of the cost. Philips funded a quarter, and the rest was raised from wealthy Taiwanese people who were asked or pushed by the government to invest. This was a bold move, do nothing but manufacturing. But it worked. I mean, they were confident in this industry that was still new. And that's why the Americans were very happy to let Taiwan take the lead in this very tedious and costly manufacturing process. This allowed chip prices to go low and for their performance to get better. But that's only the beginning, because the rise of TSMC skyrocketed later. And the reason for that?
We are calling it iPhone.
At first, Apple relied on Samsung to make their chips. Apple designed the chips and Samsung built the chips for them. But Apple quickly realized that it's maybe not a good idea to rely on their biggest competitor. So around 2013, they started looking for other partners. So they reached out to Intel because Intel was the best chip makers for years. Intel was both designing and building their own chips. But you know what? Intel refused to make the chips that Apple designed. And that might be their biggest mistake. Intel CEO later said that he couldn't see it. I mean, no one expected Apple to grow that fast. So Apple approached TSMC and decided to make a bet on them. And the same goes for TSMC, because TSMC bet their entire business on Apple. They built factories specifically for Apple because Apple injected billions of dollars. And this bet paid off for TSMC. Apple became their largest customer over the year because they were predictable. You might think, why didn't Apple build their own factories since they have the money? Well, the answer is that this is a complex industry. It makes more sense financially, even to Apple, to just let the others make the chips for them while they focus on designing them. They didn't want to deal with upgrading the chip factories every single year, which makes a lot of sense. This partnership was very successful. Apple was TSMC's biggest customer for years. But this love story might not last long because of what happens next.
ChatGPT.
ChatGPT.
In 2022, the AI revolution started. This is where the stakes got bigger. AI got more powerful and showed how it could change how we work. When tech companies heard that ChatGPT was trained on Nvidia's GPUs, all of them wanted those GPUs. GPUs are graphic cards, which also contains chips. And Nvidia has been the leader in the field since the company was founded. In fact, they created the need for GPUs themselves. They noticed that while CPUs made calculations in a sequential order, GPUs can split the work for multiple smaller processors, making the calculations in parallel. This was very useful for games and AI. So now we have this third category of chips that is owned and led by Nvidia since day one. But it turns out that chips used for GPUs are much larger than other chips. So this, combined with the explosive demand, made GPU chips extremely profitable. But again, Nvidia doesn't build the chips, they design them and ask builders to make them for them. So they asked TSMC, and TSMC was very happy to make the chips for them. In fact, TSMC decided to make more chips for GPUs than chips for smartphones.
AI chipmaker Nvidia surpassed Apple for the first time to become Taiwan chip giant TSMC's largest customer in 2025.
And by 2026, analysts consider Nvidia to account for 22% of TSMC's revenue versus 18% for Apple. Apple is still a big customer, but Nvidia's need for chips is growing faster. So TSMC found themselves in a tricky position. The demand was much higher than what they could address. So they had to choose between their loyal customer, Apple, and the more attractive opportunity. By the way, this is the first time Apple's revenues were limited by the number of chips TSMC can supply. This has never happened before. So this led the chips to become more and more expensive. Okay, enough with the tech talk. At this point, there is a question that comes to mind. If this is a race between companies, how did governments and countries get involved? The answer is in this document from TSMC, which states that 90% of US Air Force precision-guided munitions rely on TSMC-made semiconductors. Today, chips, especially AI chips, became extremely important for the military. Everyone wants to get their hands on the most advanced chips available. The race changed in nature. Another dimension is added here. It shifted to these specific steps in the supply chain. Let's see how it looks like now. The US are leading the design, and Taiwan is leading the manufacturing. This is the third Asian country in the leaderboard. But where is China? Well, China is looking at this and they're like, there is no way we can be out of this race. We are the world's factory.
I think that we have two equal partners. China probably is lagging behind, but not so much.
At first, Chinese companies used to buy big volumes of advanced chips from the US or from TSMC directly. In fact, China spends more money importing chips than oil, which is what helped them build giant telecom companies like Huawei. The US was happy with this relationship. They were making billions in revenues from China, which helped them develop even better tech and grow faster. But then China's ambitions got bigger. Chinese tech companies evolved quickly and started to worry the US. So by 2010, China was able to design their own chips and ask TSMC to make the chips for them. This worked so well that in 2018, the US felt like they needed to do something to slow the Chinese down.
Right now they are in an AI race with the USA and they try to be global leader, and so they desperate need AI chips.
So a series of moves started. In 2018, Huawei was blacklisted. They couldn't get US technology anymore. By 2020, the US stopped TSMC from making chips for Chinese companies. This was a big hit for Huawei, but it didn't stop there. In 2022, the US blocked the export of the best GPUs and AI chips to any Chinese company, and they forbid any company in the world to supply chip-making equipment to Chinese companies. The message from the US to China was clear. You cannot buy or make the best chips. But China always found a way to get hold of the technology somehow.
They tried to get them by establish joint ventures, for example, in Singapore and Hong Kong with Taiwan company. And China it's too big to fail, yes? No private company can ignore or bypass this huge market.
Meanwhile, Taiwan was in the middle of this. China has been showing signs of a growing desire to get Taiwan back under its territory. If this happens, the world's supply chain will get disrupted. This is a big deal. In fact, the US considers this industry as the biggest single point of failure in the world's economy because of this situation. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying who is in the right or wrong in this story. My goal is to explain a complex topic that impacts all of us. So, the US felt like this is too dangerous for them. They decided to unlock a $50 billion program to build those famous fabs in the American soil. They pushed TSMC to build a new fab in Arizona, and this is already happening.
TSMC is now in volume production in Arizona too.
Although the best technology and the big capacity remain in Taiwan, this is the first step for them. But this will take years and massive investments for an uncertain outcome. Today, the situation is fragile for two reasons. one supply chain bottleneck. As the chip technology is advancing, the supply chain is becoming more and more concentrated. And that's concerning. TSMC is the only supplier for those chips, but they themselves rely on another company to provide them with the machine that makes the chips. And by the way, these machines are the most expensive machines we've ever seen. Each one costs $400 million, and they look like this. These machines use a technology that only one player masters. That player is based in the Netherlands, and it's called ASML. Now, ASML in turn depends entirely on special mirrors that they use inside their machines. And you guessed it, they entirely depend on one single company based in Germany called Zeiss. This is globalization in its most fragile and extreme form. Then you have all of these other companies who work in harmony and who are all financed and driven by these tech giants like Apple and Nvidia in the US and elsewhere. If any part of this structure fails, everything breaks down. This delicate interdependent supply chain works very well now, and it's the result of years of collective optimization. But this also means that any disruption could completely derail the whole system. So that's one. 2. Competition. Intel, which was dominant in the US for years, is maybe now finally catching up in the race for the first time since 2020. However, they haven't proved yet they can run fabs at a scale comparable to TSMC. They are backed by the US government, and they have already started signing deals with the giants like Apple. Samsung is also back again. Samsung is today the second largest fab, but they are similar to Intel. They can design and build the chips. Recently, they announced they began mass production of their new technology, and they aim at bringing a new fab in Texas by this year. So the race might be tight between Intel, Samsung, and TSMC. This means that if Intel and Samsung succeed, the world might not rely completely on one supplier.
It's like craziness about AI right now, what is happening in the world.
So what's the takeaway from this? Well, it seems like everyone is focused on the geopolitics around chip supply. But here is what almost nobody's watching. All tech companies over-order to ensure they get an allocation from TSMC, because TSMC is overbooked. And TSMC does invest a lot to address this demand. In fact, they are investing over $50 billion this year alone to build more factories. But this bet assumes the demand will continue to grow in the upcoming years, which means that all these factories need to be filled for at least 5 years for TSMC to make a return on their investment. But considering the new competition and the size of the investment, building more factories becomes a very hard decision to make. In fact, TSMC's CEO confessed he's very nervous about the potential overinvestment. And he says if he did not do it carefully, that would be a disaster for TSMC for sure. So the thing most likely to break all this is the simple chance that all this AI demand doesn't show up on time for the economics to work. We keep treating the chip race like a fight over a map. But the thing most likely to break it was never the map, it was the math. Okay, this was the first episode for this show. I hope you got a lot of value from this, and I would appreciate if you can share your feedback, whether it's good or bad. Especially the bad, so that I can improve. Alright, thank you for watching. See you in the next one.